We are back with episode 2 of our His Health series here in the month of June. I'm really excited to be digging into my guys' health. Not that, like I said, a lot of our topics are obviously referencing both males and females, but I realized that I hadn't really done like a dedicated series to all of my amazing guys out there. And even after our first episode, which if you missed that last week, definitely go back and catch it because I really introduced this series. I introduced the 4 most common overlooked health conditions that I see with my males in clinic. And over the course of the next few weeks, we're going to be kind of double clicking on each one of those and giving you even more information and even more nuance into how to make sure that all of my guys out there and all of the women that have men in their life that they love and support in their health journey are getting the support that they need, and also maybe just connecting the dots in debunking some of the health beliefs or health myths that we might have rolling out there. So diving into episode 2 of the His Health series, I feel like I couldn't go too far into the series without giving testosterone its love and light, right? Testosterone becomes a very major conversation point, especially when we think about male health, because testosterone in males is the primary sex hormone and it drives so many systemic processes, not just libido and overall sexual health and performance, which obviously it's known for, but it holds many major processes in the body, many major benefits. And so when men struggle with times in their life where they're testosterone deficient or they're inadequately converting testosterone, they're going to feel it and they're going to have the symptoms of that. And usually those are some of the symptoms that really pique their attention the most and cause them to then seek out some more advanced medical opinions, right? So testosterone is going to be the name of the game and the main focus of our conversations today. But I think what you'll find is that the take on testosterone is going to be way more than just more hormones. What happens when we start to realize that testosterone actually may not be the source of overall dysfunction in a male body? When testosterone is low, it's actually more of a symptom. It's a symptom of other upstream speed bumps that are preventing the body from adequately producing testosterone, adequately converting testosterone, adequately accessing the amount of testosterone that is needed. So a lot of times when we think of testosterone, again, one of the most blanket kind of recommendations that males will get is they'll pop into a strip mall testosterone clinic and they'll get a pellet therapy, injection therapy, cream therapy. And I'm here to kind of challenge and ask what happens if the situation isn't just more hormones, right? Because there can also be a very relevant conversation that needs to happen first before we just pump the body full of more hormones. We didn't really ever ask the question of why. Why is testosterone low in the first place? The body is very smart, and the body's probably doing that for a reason of down-regulating testosterone or not having enough of the upstream signals to adequately keep enough testosterone on board. So today we're going to really talk about what I call the hormone hierarchy in males. We've talked about the hormone hierarchy before. It is not different from males to females, but we're going to bring this back to the surface so that we can really double click on what this conversation is supposed to sound like when we see or hear the phrase low testosterone. Or for males, maybe they got some labs done and they've been told that they have low testosterone, and maybe they think that their only option is just more hormones. And I'm going to challenge that theory for us today. So before we really dive in, there are a couple shocking statistics I think are really relevant for our conversations today that I want to just put on the table right away, because these stopped me kind of cold in my tracks when I hear these kind of statistics, and I think they will for you as well too. The average testosterone levels in males have declined approximately 40% since 1980. And on the flip side, testosterone replacement therapy prescriptions have increased by over 300% since 2000 and 2020. So over the last 45 years, we've seen testosterone decline a whopping 40%. So that's a really big percent difference of, let's just say, a 40-year-old male walking around, used to walk around with a testosterone level in the 600s, 700s. Now that same 40-year-old male might be walking around with a testosterone that's in the 300s or 400s. That's a very big decline in a 45 year time span, okay? But in the last 20 years, then we've seen testosterone replacement prescriptions actually increase threefold, 300%. No doubt testosterone is declining across our population. The prescription response to that is absolutely exploding. And of course, can we turn it into a business model? Of course we can. We can help men identify, it's like, hey, you have a problem, you have low testosterone. Here, I'm going to sell you the solution to it. Yes, of course. So that's why it's exploded a lot too, because we've realized that there's a growing epidemic of low testosterone. And instead of asking why and truly reaching it from a root cause perspective, we just monetize it and sell it to men as a solution. So welcome to the world of healthcare, right? And almost nobody in this industry is in that whole transaction is really asking why. Why is testosterone declining in the first place? And that's the entire conversation that I really want to have today. Not whether testosterone replacement therapy works. It can, of course, in the right context and with the right foundation in place. But what is low testosterone actually telling you? Because there's a lot more clues about why the testosterone is low in the first place if we start to think about this as more of a systemic problem. So first things first, we kind of piece apart this concept called the hormone hierarchy. The hormone hierarchy really helps us realize that every single human body actually follows a very strategic order of operations when it comes to how health is rebuilt or how health is promoted. And it also follows that same trajectory in terms of where we see health declines, okay? Anything that the body deems as stress, right? The body's major stress hormone is cortisol. Anything that elicits a cortisol response, whether that is, like I said, controllable, uncontrollable, physical, mental, emotional stress, is going to dictate your overall gut and your gut health, your gut microbiome, your digestion, your absorption. Your overall gut health and microbiome and immune system is going to determine how your liver processes and detoxes all sorts of internal and external compounds. And then finally, your liver detoxification determines your hormone balance. Okay, that clinical hierarchy is something that I teach very in depth in all of my practitioner training mentorships, as well as work with my patients one-on-one in clinic through that. So when we start to think about this hormone hierarchy and understand kind of the full scope of what testosterone encompasses, this conversation is going to land like totally different, right? Even when we think about at the upstream, at the very top of this hormone hierarchy is testosterone, okay? Testosterone is not just a sex hormone. It is a major metabolic hormone for males. It drives muscle protein synthesis, the ability to maintain muscle, the ability to build muscle. It governs bone density. That's a biggie. Low testosterone is a primary driver of osteoporosis in men. Also regulates red blood cell production in men and directly impacts things like oxygen deliverability, endurance, energy. It supports cognitive function, mood stability, motivation, obviously things like libido and sexual performance. It's also for males deeply involved in insulin regulation as well too. So meaning that testosterone and blood sugar are in a bidirectional relationship with each other at all times. So when testosterone declines, especially in males, they feel it, right? They're going to feel it, and all these systems are going to feel it. The fatigue, the brain fog, sometimes the weight gain, low motivation, low drive, mood changes. These are not separate systems, or should I say, they're not separate symptoms. They are all this hormonal fingerprint that we're seeing across multiple systems simultaneously. Now, where does testosterone come from? 95% of testosterone is synthesized in the Leydig cells of the testes in our males. So this process requires very clear directions. It requires a lot of mineral and vitamin cofactors. It requires a lot of raw materials to do this process. And these are things that we're not really told about, right? What are some of these raw materials? What could stop testosterone production in its tracks? Cholesterol, okay? Cholesterol is a steroid backbone that forms all of our sex hormones. Testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, all of those are steroid-based hormones, and they have a cholesterol-based backbone. So cholesterol is the precursor to all sex hormones, which makes this whole like, here, let's just give everybody a statin medication to drive their cholesterol down into the basement, is worth examining, but we'll leave that for the next episode of this series. So we know that cholesterol is a big cofactor. I see many men that are actually being overprescribed statin medications, and because of that, they don't even have enough cholesterol to make testosterone. That makes sense, right? There's also a lot of mineral cofactors required. We need zinc, we need magnesium, we need vitamin D, we need vitamin B6. These are not optional. These are absolutely rate limiting steps if we are deficient in these key nutrients. I would say a key one for men is zinc. Zinc is a biggie. Zinc deficiencies are very, very common amongst men, especially if you have gut dysfunction, you have low stomach acid, you have poor gut microbiome balance. You cannot synthesize enough adequate testosterone if you are deficient in zinc. You just can't do it. Same thing with magnesium, same thing with vitamin D. These are, like I said, steroid precursors that are absolutely required. And this is why I'm just, like I said, I will be out here on my soapbox telling people that low testosterone is not the source. Low testosterone is a symptom. Okay, this is a downstream symptom of raw materials are depleted, cofactors are missing, the upstream signaling is disrupted, and so therefore the testosterone output is going to drop. Makes sense. This is not a testosterone problem. This is a terrain problem, and it's very flexible and it's also very fixable. So what are the main upstream drivers besides like some of these cofactor and precursor deficiencies? What's driving some of these cofactor and precursor deficiencies? There's really three main upstream drivers that we talk about with this hormone hierarchy in order to better understand how can we support a male who is displaying signs and symptoms of low testosterone without just jumping to more hormones that probably will have more side effects for them than anything. So the three main upstream drivers that we want to understand: why testosterone drops before anyone is asking why. Number one, we're not going to be super shocked or surprised to hear that the number one upstream driver of low testosterone in males is cortisol. Cortisol and testosterone are both synthesized from the same precursor, and that is cholesterol gets converted into a submolecule called pregnenolone. And that pregnenolone then it essentially hits a fork in the road. If there's high amounts of stress on the system, the body is always going to prioritize cortisol production. Most of that cortisol, or most of that pregnenolone, is going to get shuttled towards stress hormone production or towards cortisol production. And then only what pregnenolone is left, that can kind of, the leftovers or the scraps can go towards testosterone, which sometimes isn't very much on a system that is kind of swimming in stress all day, every day, right? So when we think about this overall picture, we really want to start to understand a little bit more about these upstream drivers of overall testosterone. Okay, cortisol is going to be a biggie. And as we think about this like kind of shuttled pathway, the shuttling pathway is going to be this branch between, is there enough cholesterol to pregnenolone, and then pregnenolone has to make a choice. If there's a lot of stress on the system, it's going to be prioritized towards cortisol, and then there's just not enough of those precursors left over to create testosterone. Makes sense, okay? Is anyone really digging into and asking the questions around cortisol for males? No, not very often, right? The practical implication is a man in a chronic stress state putting testosterone into his body without addressing the cortisol picture, you're fighting upstream physiological barriers here. The terrain is still prioritizing survival mode, and the results are going to be limited as best, right? You're just going to require more and more and more and more exogenous testosterone over time. You can't supplement your way out of a cortisol dominant state. So this is where we audit things like sleep apnea. We audit things like overall exercise intensity, movement, circadian rhythm, sunshine exposure, overall nervous system regulation tools, blood sugar, right? These are the conversations that actually should be happening before we just shove a guy full of more testosterone. Upstream driver number 2, blood sugar. Blood sugar, and more specifically a pattern that we call insulin resistance, tends to go hand in hand with low testosterone in males. This is a common testosterone suppressor that not a lot of people are looking at. Definitely not a lot of practitioners are studying. Mostly because the concept of even drawing labs to discover insulin resistance requires that you run more than just a fasting glucose in someone. Not super helpful. Or you're running like a fasting glucose and maybe once a year you get like a hemoglobin A1C drawn. You need to look at 3 major markers together: blood sugar, hemoglobin A1C, and your fasting insulin. By calculating all 3 of those numbers, we can actually do a reverse calculation of something called your HOMA-IR score. This is a score of overall insulin resistance in the body. If you have insulin resistance in the body, your body is not only going to not make enough testosterone, it's also going to convert a higher amount of that testosterone into estrogen. And then guys develop more man boobs and more of the adipose tissue. They're going to have too much testosterone or too much estrogen to testosterone ratio. Guess what? These are the guys every single time I see come in and they have been put on testosterone replacement therapy and their body is just taking more testosterone and converting it into more estrogen. They're not going to feel any better until you answer the question of why are they converting too much testosterone into estrogen? I'm not going to pump more testosterone into a system that is just going to convert it into estrogen. Like craziness. No, we need to go back and really uncover where is this insulin resistance pattern coming from. Could it be coming from diet? Yes. Could it be coming from systemic inflammation? Absolutely. Can it be coming from genetic liver detoxification deficiencies? Yes, absolutely. So a lot of times there's kind of a very clear picture here. Visceral fat, like a male, not just the fat that you can squish, like and pinch, that's subcutaneous fat. Usually there's a phenotype here. There's usually a lot of fatigue. There's usually a lot of sleep apnea. There's usually, like I said, high blood sugar, high hemoglobin A1C, high levels of fasting insulin, an elevated HOMA-IR score, more visceral fat, like more of that like hard distended fat. And that is just a little estrogen producing factory in the body, okay? So we have to understand that adding more hormones like testosterone replacement therapy does not break that cycle. They are just gonna aromatase or convert more testosterone into estrogen. So we know that cortisol is an upstream driver. We know that underlying insulin resistance is an upstream driver. And then the third and final one that we'll talk about today is gut dysfunction. Very broad, very vague, I know, but probably the biggest connection here from a gut dysfunction standpoint is really the living, breathing microbiome that is in your gut. The balance between good guys and bad guys is directly correlated to what's called your estrobolome. Your estrobolome is a collection of bacteria in the body that are responsible for estrogen excretion and estrogen elimination from the body. So again, a lot of times in a dysbiotic gut, there's too many bad guys, not enough good guys. The estrogen does not clear sufficiently and it gets reabsorbed back into the liver, reabsorbed back into systemic circulation, and then that's going to directly suppress testosterone production, right? So you get this kind of vicious cycle going on here. Also, advanced levels of gut dysbiosis, like too many bad guys, not enough good guys, creates an environment called leaky gut. This leaky gut or this intestinal permeability drastically increases the amount of endotoxins that are crossing through the mucosal layer of the gut and entering systemic circulation. Sometimes you'll hear these called endotoxins. Sometimes you'll hear these called lipopolysaccharides. At the end of the day, we have a dysbiotic gut that's created a leaky gut. And now that leaky gut is actually letting in toxins into the bloodstream that are going to put an immense amount of stress and pressure on the liver and therefore are going to contribute to suppressed levels of testosterone. I can't make this stuff up, right? But what we're not seeing is a slew of practitioners and education of, yes, can we measure a guy's testosterone levels? For sure. What are the upstream drivers? Like, we look at that testosterone and we have to ask why. Diagnostically speaking, a male is diagnosed as low testosterone according to the American Urological Association when their level is below 250. Most guys feel symptomatic below 500. 500, 400, 300, 200. What about those guys, right? They are on a fast track of having like diagnosable low testosterone, and no one is looking at their cortisol. No one's grabbing intricate enough labs to look at their overall inflammation and their overall insulin resistance scores. No one is absolutely looking at their gut and looking at how their body is actually processing detoxing and all of those things I have seen firsthand. Not even touching testosterone. And by working on cortisol, working on blood sugar, reversing insulin resistance, improving their dysbiotic gut and their liver detoxification, doubling their testosterone. And I didn't even touch it. I have so many guys that I work with, and they're like, from labs to labs, like 90 days later, 6 months later, we redraw blood work, and they're like, wait a second, my testosterone level doubled? It's like, yeah. And they're like, was I taking anything for my testosterone? And I'm like, no. They're like, crazy. So my body is just now making more testosterone on its own? Yes. And it is a beautiful thing. Absolutely. So this is where, like I said, the real hormone evaluation to me should be drawing total testosterone. Absolutely. Total testosterone bonus if we draw things like free testosterone. I love to look at things like sex hormone binding globulin because that's telling us more about the liver and the gut. I love looking at things like fasting insulin, glucose. That way we can calculate some of those like HOMA-IR scores for you. We also want to look at your overall cortisol pattern. We also want to look at your vitamin D levels. What about levels of zinc and magnesium in the blood as well too? This is a comprehensive lab test for a male. And most males are not getting any of these markers. Sure, they might be getting, oh, here's a cholesterol panel. Maybe you should start a statin. Oh, here's a fasting glucose. Maybe you should start a metformin. Oh, you have elevated liver enzymes like stop drinking alcohol, right? And while some of those things can be valid conversations, they're not complete conversations. And they're certainly not complete care, because if we're just taking a male's testosterone in isolation and then just handing him like more hormones, we didn't really look at what are the upstream drivers of that, knowing that cortisol, insulin resistance, as well as a dysbiotic gut. All of those things are ultimately why testosterone is low in the first place. And always just adding more hormones into that situation doesn't always give us the results that we're intending. So hopefully, like I said, this conversation was helpful for my part 2 of my His Health series for my guys out there. For all my practitioners out there, even me talking through these labs and like an adequate lab panel for a male, there's so much power that you can find in blood work as well too. So for any of my practitioners that are listening, if you're catching this in June, I am hosting a 4-week clinical intensive training for practitioners, talking all about how to transform functional blood chemistry from just individual markers to something that actually carries meaning. If this is something that you want some more training in functional blood chemistry, knowing what labs to order, knowing how to interpret them, knowing how to pick out the patterns and the stories, don't hesitate. Click on the link in my bio and sign yourself up for that 4-week clinical intensive, because you'll walk away feeling so much more confident with some of these conversations. In the meantime, come back next week for week 3 of my His Health series.